I'm Jen West, professional rebel of delight.
And I'm Dave Wiesdock, sage of creative scaffolding.
And this is shadow casting. Oh, Dave, are we going to have a fun podcast today? How are you doing?
Oh, I feel like I'm in hell.
Oh my gosh, that's the perfect way to feel today because, Dave, I kind of want to take our podcast on a little detour this week. Normally we just talk about an idea, but you've totally corrupted me. And I just want to let you know I'm a loser, baby.
Oh, no, you're an angel to me.
So for our listeners, first I want to say we are talking about Hazbin Hotel. If you've seen it, then you're probably going, Hazbin Hotel. If you haven't, there will be spoilers. Also, as Dave just alluded to, it's an adult cartoon that's based in hell, and it deals with every vice you've ever had. So this one will probably have some profanity in it. It's going to talk about a little bit of sex, a little bit of drugs, because the character we are going to focus on today is Angel Dust, and specifically his song, Loser Baby.
Yeah. So, for everyone else that's listening, this is kind of like your disclaimer / trigger warning / spoiler warning. So if you haven't seen the show, if the show is something that you're using, because I know people do this, if they're using it as a therapeutic device with their therapist, or there's some sort of connection to the show that maybe you're still working through, maybe hit pause on this one and hold on to it till you're in a space where you can be a little bit more, I don't want to say less triggered because that's not the right word, but a little softer, maybe a little bit, you can hold more space for this show.
Yeah, because we're going to keep it at a higher level. So if you're in it, it may just piss you off.
Yeah.
Because you're like, it's harder than that. There's more to it. You don't get it. And we get it, but we're keeping it at the level of how does this apply to shadow casting and personal change and how that growth process happens, kind of separate from addiction and abuse and those kind of things.
Right. And I think putting it another way too, we acknowledge the trauma and the abuse and stuff that happens in the show, especially with this character. But what we're more focused on is the growth pattern that this character goes through, because that's what this podcast is about. It's about our growth. It's not about focusing just on the trauma or just on the less than ideal qualities. It's about how we learn to grow from those things and support systems and the natural way that we can find these things outside of ourselves. And we're going to get into all that. So I'm really excited about this podcast.
Yeah. And I love Angel Dust. I think he's so cool. He's a fun character. He's got a tremendous personality.
He does.
And he's kind of the through line character of this particular season because he's the start of the hotel. And then he comes all the way through to the other end. And he's just kind of a different character as he moves along.
Yeah. And okay, well, wait a minute. First of all, I think Alistair's a better character. I just have to start off with that because we are podcasters. So our medium is radio.
That's right. We do adore Alistair. He's super fun. I don't want to say he's our hero because that's a little sadistic, but he's so cool.
He's a really cool guy. Maybe we need to do a podcast on him later. I mean, he literally has a shadow and we are shadow casting. So
yeah, if people like this one and say do more Hazbin, we definitely will do that. But yeah, so let's dig into Angel Dust. So Angel Dust is a drug-using porn star who is in hell. That's his character. He went to hell and he's a porn star, and the guy who runs the porn show owns his soul. So that has its own story behind it. And Angel uses his sex and his drug addiction to kind of create a wall for himself, like protection. And that's kind of where we start with him. Like you see this guy who will use sex or talk about sex to make other people uncomfortable or just give himself some power, but it's really a shell for him. But you also see these hints about Angel too. He's not an evil character. He's just kind of a cool guy. I liked him just at the very beginning, even though he was a little rough on the edges, because he's good to people. Even in like the first episode, I think it's the pilot. Is that the one where he fights with Cherry Bomb and joins her?
He does it a couple times. Pilot's one of them, yeah.
Yeah, I think the pilot. So not the show, but in that first episode, there's another character, Cherry Bomb, who's like in a battle, and they're seeing who's gonna take control of certain parts of hell after an event happened. Yeah. And so you meet Angel Dust, and he comes in and he joins Cherry Bomb, and he fights with her on her side because they're partners, and he likes her, and you just get his nicer side
as he's killing people, but
he's killing other people in hell with these Tommy guns. He's got Tommy guns.
I love it that they use Tommy guns. It's just like such a timepiece for it.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing to the show that's kind of fun is when they die, they kind of keep that personality in hell. So if they died in the 20s, they've got that jazzy kind of thing. Angel Dust must have died during in Brooklyn or something.
Yeah. I don't know that there's a lot of fan theories, and I'm sure Vizzy has said some things about Angel/Anthony. But I don't really know the time period that he's from personally.
Yeah, he seems to be gangster related. But a lot of the show is you got card sharks, and they're actually sharks. It's a good show.
Yeah.
Watch it. But it's for adults. It's an adult show.
Yes. Just because it's a cartoon no longer means it's for the kiddos.
No, definitely not for the kiddos.
You brought up a really interesting point about Angel and how even in the beginning of the show, when he's more in his kind of like shadow-esque personality and he is kind of casting that longer shadow, we see glimpses of who he is kind of as Anthony, which was his name when he was alive, kind of who Anthony is as a character. And what I find super interesting is that from the get-go, one of the characters just could smell his act a mile away, and that was Husk. And it's interesting because some people are really good at fooling others and themselves, creating these illusions of who they are, whereas Angel was doing it from a point of protection, from a point of he knew that if he had this persona, this identity, that he would get what he needed out of his transactional relationships with people. It was very transactional, If he worked for Valentino, who kind of owned his soul, he would get fame. And if he got fame, he got money. And if he got money, he could partake in the festivities of his choice. It's not necessarily that he was lying and manipulating to some nefarious intent, whereas maybe, you could maybe argue that Alistair maybe has some ulterior motives. But for Angel, it was a mode of protection. It was a mode of safety. And so when you can kind of see how he casts a shadow in that way, it really opens you up to noticing that he really was a great character for this hotel. This hotel was built by the daughter of Lucifer in the show. Her name's Charlie. And she believes that souls can be redeemed, that if they go through this process in this hotel, that their soul will change from the inside out and that they will be able to go to heaven. Of course, that creates a lot of tension between heaven, and in the show, it's just a great show. The point is that because Angel was able to, well, I guess we're kind of jumping ahead, but there were things about the quality of his character that predisposed him to be able to go through this transformation. And what I would like to say is that he already received his kind of judgment, so to speak. He was in hell. On Earth, we haven't received that. Like, we have the opportunity to recognize the traits within ourselves and our motivations and our intent behind those traits. And we have the ability to question those things, to change from that intent and that motivation from the inside out, and how we choose to cast our shadow. I just wanted to paint the picture of how this kind of ties to our podcast and why we think this is just such a great example of the shadow casting archetype that we discuss.
Yeah. And Angel is the first member, the first person who comes into the Hazbin Hotel to change, to reform, to have the possibility of going to heaven. Now, he kind of did it just so that he had free room and board. And at the beginning of the show, he's placating to Charlie and being like, whatever, but he doesn't really help her at the beginning because he still goes through all of his vices. He's only being good because he has to, but he's sneaking the things that make him quote unquote bad. He's not really in it at the beginning. He's not there because he wants to be there and he wants to change and he wants redemption.
Right.
So he goes in. So when you start, it's just kind of like, I'm here because I get free room and board and food. And yeah, this works out for me. I get to use my money on drugs instead, so.
Right. And again, that's another great example of what I was saying earlier, which is it was transactional. He was there for something for him. Where this comes into is that he was setting the tone for how people treated him.
Knowingly, and I mean, he wanted to deal with people from that transactional sexual, I'm a movie star, porn star. He wanted that, so he pushed it out at everybody because he feels in control, right?
Right. Yes. And so I was just thinking as you were saying that too, Charlie, who I would say one of her top values is radical acceptance, accepted that about him and allowed him to stay there for free, knowing he wasn't invested in what she was trying to do. You even see this when Sir Pentious shows up in the show. There's this comment where she says, "Oh, I'm so excited to have our first guest at the hotel." And this is a pivotal moment because Angel goes, "Well, what about me? I was the first guest." And she's like, "Yeah, but you're not interested." It wasn't a judgment. It wasn't a dismissal of who Angel was or why he was there, but she just recognized he wasn't invested. However, after that point, you see Angel kind of have a shift in his motivation and his intent. He's like, well, wait a minute. If they're willing to accept me as who I am without me needing to change who I am, and I'm projecting a little bit into his thought pattern here, but it's almost like he thought, well, if they accept me as a fake me, would they actually accept me as the real me? Because here's the crazy thing. I think in the show up until that point, I don't think anyone accepted him fake or real. It was just a persona. It was his shield. It was an illusion to protect himself. And so little by little, you see cracks start to form in that shell and that shield. And this goes back to the transactional, this disingenuous relationship. And the counter, the antithesis of this for him is almost all his interactions with Tusk. Tusk challenges him at the core. He's like, I see through you. I see your identity. He's like, you show up to my bar drunk every day. You spill the beans, so to speak. You've allowed someone in, and I'm going to hold you to who you want to be, who I see you can be, which is actually really huge for us now that I'm thinking about it, but focuses on Angel. So Angel.
Yeah. That's so cool too, because he's the bartender of the Hazbin Hotel. And he, at one point, does an entire monologue about how he sees every single person and all their flaws and all their bullshit, basically. Yeah. But I just want to go back to Pentious for a second in that first interaction, because that hit me hard. Angel's feelings are hurt by the truth. Because I don't think he even acknowledged the fact that he wasn't in it and it was just transactional. He was starting to like the hotel and everybody, and Pentious, somebody he's competitive with. He's actually who Cherry Bomb was fighting in the first episode. So, because Pentious is cute, we love him too. But Pentious comes in and he's the first one saying, "I want to be changed." And so it's hurtful for Angel because he's got these friends, but it's false and it's transactional. And it makes that little tiny shift. One, I think competitively, I can do that. I think that's the start, is a competitiveness. No, not him.
Well, yeah, I mean, if in a way it was very true to Angel's nature. He is a star. Mm-hmm. I mean, he is that very quintessential spotlight energy. And when the spotlight was taken off of him, I think you're absolutely on point. He went to his being of competitiveness because he wanted to be the star. So even if the motivation necessarily wasn't because he wanted to be reformed right away, there was a shift there. And the other thing I wanted to bring up too with Serpentius is the trust fall exercise. So you start to see Angel almost bait him a bit, because there's this one part where Angel is like, "Okay, your turn, Serpentius." He like tells him to go on the stage. I can do it. You should do it, kind of thing. And what I think you actually start to see is Angel's energy shift. The energy stopped being about creating the persona and started being outside of himself. And again, even though it was from this competitive lens, it was still this shift to he actually invested energy in someone outside himself, because up until that point, it was all about him, me. And where I was going with this bigger picture for Angel and kind of the shadow casting lesson that I'm taking from this is that when we put all of our energy into maintaining an illusion because we think that that's what people want to see, we actually create these really disingenuous relationships that end up costing us more energy, more time, more pain in the long run, because we're not being true to ourselves. And so we can't have a true connection with the other person.
Yeah, 100%. And just on that, when we think shadow casting, most of what we've talked about is we change ourselves so that we cast a better shadow out. But part of the change is going inside and seeing what shadow we're casting on ourselves.
Yeah.
And one of the quotes or a saying that I say a lot is, we teach people how to treat us. And we normally do it unknowingly. And so if we don't like ourselves, we're telling other people that they don't have to treat us well. If we put on a front that we're tough and we can take everything, but we're actually kind of gooey in the center, when somebody comes at us hard, it hurts really bad. But we've told that person they can do it. We've trained them that we're tough and we can take it and we'll fight you back. But that's not what we actually want. But we've taught other people to treat us that way. So the reflection is, what shadow did we cast inside that we need to get a handle on? And I really feel like the relationship of Husk and Angel hits this so hard, because Husk doesn't want to play the game. He does not want to treat Angel the way that Angel treats himself.
Right.
One, because he knows Husk has been through the shit. It's quite clear in Loser Baby that he gets it.
Yeah. Well, and so to that point, just a little bit before that song, you're right. You have to go inward, because when you go inside yourself, it's disorienting a bit, because you have a lot of stuff around it. Unless you've done a lot of the work, there's societal expectations inside, there's parental, cultural, social, friendship. And so one of the guides, I think, when you start going inward is to find your values, right? To find those. It's more than a moral compass. It's like a value compass, because they're not dictations, they're guides. So it's not like saying, like, if I value this, I can only take this action. It's, I have some choices before me. Of these choices, what aligns with the values that I have?
Exactly.
And so I think we keep hitting on this Angel-Husk relationship, because Husk is kind of the mirror for Angel to go inward. And we see the values manifest in Angel, whether he acknowledges it or not. The audience can kind of see it from the outside looking in as the show progresses to that psalm that I know we're building towards. I kind of want to hit on those values and where they show up, because I feel like to understand how Husk was able to finally help Angel get through his shadow, you have to understand what the values were that Husk was seeing towards in that song. The first value that I think Angel had was the friendship. And we see this in the trust exercise episode. We kind of hit on it with the trust fall part at the beginning, but then towards the end of and also I think we said spoilers for all this, but
yeah, spoiler.
Yeah. So then at the end of the episode, Vaggie, who is Charlie's girlfriend, decides to take them out and go fight demons, because she's a very militaristic mindset, and so she feels that to build camaraderie, you build brothers in arms. And so she throws them into the battlefield, quite literally. And like literally throws them over the edge into the battle. And she's like, "Oh, you go."
Mainly Pentious and Angel. Both of those guys. Now, Angel knows how to fight. Sir Pentious, not so much. He's kind of a softer. He needs like weapons around him that he can kind of stay away from battle. He's not the infantry guy.
He's not. And so to that point, Pentious kind of flails in this. And so we find at the end of the episode, Angel, of all the people, I mean, even Baggy was there. She could have helped. Angel helped Sir Pentious. Angel, because there was that one funny quote where Angel's like, yeah, and you were getting hit by like a limb or something. And he's like, yes, that was most unpleasant. But it's like they can make a joke about it. Angel protected Sir Pentious. They built a bond. But Angel didn't protect Sir Pentious because of the competitiveness we were talking about earlier. He protected him because this is actually somebody that accepts me for who I am, even when I don't accept myself. And I want to protect that friendship. And so he made a choice from his value of friendship, of connection.
Yeah. And I think he also has a value for taking care of somebody who can't take care of themselves. Yeah. Because he's been in that position. So when he is stronger, I think he values protecting the weak. He's kind of got a service orientation to himself that shows up more in porn instead of life. But he's really a caring guy. This is what you start to get at as you move through the story. And I think Husk sees it too. So the lead in to before we get into Loser Baby is he goes to work and Charlie tries to help him and it causes all kinds of problems. And then his day is way worse. His hours are longer. He has to do the porn shoot for like 16 hours. And so it's awful. And he comes back. He's got his shield up. He is protecting himself and he's sitting at the bar with Husk. And Husk isn't buying it. Husk is like, don't do that shit. Be real with me. I don't want any of your sexual innuendo. I don't want you yelling at me. Right. Be you. Angel doesn't want to deal with that. He just was protecting himself from a very brutal day.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go do drugs. I'm just going to get myself away from all this shit. I'm just going to go lose myself. And that's when you get into the addiction and like just protecting yourself from the pain. So that's what he goes and does.
Agreed. So we have a couple values then, the protection element, the friendship. And I think there's another value that comes up as we build towards this song. And I think it's honesty, actually. I've been thinking about this because I'm going to unpack the suitcase just a little bit because this is the shadow casting podcast. And in the research for this, I looked up some of the qualities of Angel and what Enneagram he might be, MBTI, that kind of thing. And I found it really interesting. They qualify him as an ESTP, which is a little interesting. But what I found more interesting is that there's a little debate if he's like maybe like an Enneagram 2 wing 3 or an Enneagram 3 wing 2. And the reason that I bring that up is, again, it goes to this value of honesty for both these things, because Angel's shadow is dishonesty. He's not even honest with himself that he is transactional in his relationships. He's not honest with himself that he made choices that led to him being where he ended up. And that's not to say that things don't happen in life that make choices harder, that make coming from your values harder. But the point of the shadow casting is that you have to kind of step into your personal responsibility and recognize the effect you have on people outside of who you are. I feel like that's kind of how we get to that third value of honesty, is that it really took him and this song of Loser Baby with us to be like, oh, I can be who I want to be. And the people that will accept me and be part of my tribe will come find me. But I have to be honest in who I am. And they explore this through the song. And so I think I'd love to kind of talk about some of the lyrics of that song and how it plays to his values and how it shows his growth, and go from there.
Oh, I'm so excited. So we're just going to pull a couple of the lyrics and I'm going to attempt not to sing as we go along. But at the very beginning, before singing even starts, Husk has pulled Angel Dust out of a bad situation at a bar. And Angel's sitting on the sidewalk saying, I need to do this. I allow people to do this to me because it lets me get my head out of the fact that I'm in this life. And so Husk starts talking to him saying, hey, I know you think you've lost your way and your life's a wreck. And so you think that he's going to be like, but you're a good guy. And then he comes right in and says, well, let me just say you're correct. And I'm sure the whole audience, but especially Angel's like, wait, what?
Yeah, he even says that.
Yeah, he goes, wait, what? And then the song starts. But this is a really important part because we have to acknowledge who we are. And I have this quote, and I was going to use it after the entire song, but I think it's a good thing to pay attention to as we go through the song. It says, here's the quote. I don't know who it's by, but it says, you can't transcend what you do not know. To go beyond yourself, you must first know yourself. And I believe that's the whole point of this song. It's like saying, get real. This is who you are.
Yeah. And it goes back to that value of honesty. You have to take an honest inventory of where you're at. Instead of trying to hide behind the illusion, Husk is like, you've lost your way. You are not where you think you are. And until you recognize that, you're not going to make any progress in life. You're not going to find what you're truly looking for and what you truly value. So he says, you're right. You've lost your way. And then, he goes on.
Then he goes in and describes him.
Yeah.
He's like, going to leave out the profanity part of the description, but we've got another quote.
Well, and it's funny too, because he's like, not only am I going to tell you that you've lost your way, here is a step-by-step systematic review
of how you're a loser.
Yeah. So he says, you're a screws loose boozer. So, he drinks to dissociate, to numb. And then it's a 1-star reviewer. This is the part that
God, that's got to dig.
I was going to say, because he's not, though. He is famous in hell for what he does. I mean, even when you're in the scenes with Valentino, the kind of overlord that owns his soul, all the posters say Angel on them. So he is very obviously
successful.
But here's the thing, is that he's successful. Oh, man. Okay, this is gonna sound judgy, but I don't know how else to put this because I think this is the point, is that he is successful at being fake. It is we see multiple insights, let's say, multiple videos of Angels as we go through this series. We see real live acting from him. We see some videos that he did, and they are cheesy, they're corny, they're over the top, they're badly scripted. And that's what I think Husk is getting at. He's like, you are at the top of nothing. You are at best a 1-star actor. But Husk is saying that because he's like, I know you can be better if you go inside and come from a different set of truths. Yeah, so he says you're at rock bottom, but you've got company. And see, this is the other thing. He's speaking to that value of friendship that we talked about with Angel. You're not alone. You are seen. You are heard. You are accepted.
This is the real switch for him where he's like, but you've got company and I know from experience. And this is where, Angel's still totally bristled because he just got called a 1-star reviewer and he's at rock bottom. So,
yeah, I think he says like, F you.
Yeah, I think he does.
After that, he goes to the next part, which again, we talked about the shield that's already got some holes in it of Angels. And Husker says,
yeah,
let that down.
Yeah. And they go through an entire montage of all of their vices, and just the horrible things they are. And it says, but let your walls down, it can set you straight. So by saying, yeah, I am all this stuff, it might give you another road to take because you're owning it and it's not from a judgmental place. And Husk also reiterates the fact that everybody has a problem. He says, we're all living in the same shit sandwich. So it's like, we've all got our own shit. You're not alone. And that's a huge thing when you're trying to change, to find people who are with you on the path and get it.
Yeah. And I want to add in that too, that there's a part in the song. So when he says that, he says, sometimes set you straight. So he's not even saying like, do this and you will be free, cured. whatever. He's like, this is the first step. You've got to put in the work. You've got to put in the effort. The other quick thing is, I love that he said we're living in the same shit sandwich, because one of my favorite authors and public speakers is Mark Manson. And he talks about this. He says, everything you do in life has a shit sandwich. You have to make the choice of which shit sandwich you want to eat. And so I think it's Husk's way of saying, look, I'm not going to say that everything is glass half full and rose-colored lenses and everything once you do this process. He's like, there's still the work. There's still the hard shit you got to do and you got to deal with.
Your soul is still owned by an overlord.
Right. But you've got to own the choice, own which sandwich you want to eat. If you value friendship and honesty and protection, then come from that space and realize that there's going to be shit sandwiches with that along the way as well.
Yeah. And Husk is also saying, and I accept you. Yeah. I see where you are. And guess what? I will like you better if you're real with me. Yeah, you do drugs. Yeah, you're a big fan of sex with everybody. I'm okay with that if you own it.
Right. And he even says, you're a loser, baby. A loser just like me, but just maybe if we eat shit together, things will end up differently. In other words, yeah, you're going to have to eat your shit sandwich, but you ain't got to do it alone.
Right. Yeah. And this is when it starts to click for Angel, because he starts joining in. I'm a loser, honey. I'm a schmoozer and a dummy, but at least I know I'm not alone. So he's starting to, maybe I don't have to judge this thing. I just need to own it first. And that's the first step. It's just like owning, oh my God, here's where I am. Here's where my life is. And not saying I'm the worst person ever and I deserve this or anything like that. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm kind of dumb.
Yeah. And I feel like that's such, it still has the prickliness of like judgment to it because I'm a loser or I'm a dummy, but it's raw because he's just accepting where he's at. It's not a judgment. And I feel like, especially pulling this from the Shadowcast lens, we have to be honest with ourselves and where we're at. And we have to accept the good and the bad. I think a lot of pop psychology and, new age spiritual science does a great job of kind of guiding us inward, but then they want to smooth it over with this layer of positivity or, I don't know, just this not really acknowledging the good and the bad. I just finished watching, this is going to be another spoiler. So if you've seen Emily in Paris and you haven't seen the last season, don't listen to this next 10 seconds, but it's so point on. I got to share it. At the end of the current season, they talk about this song that one of her friends writes called Beautiful Ruins. And it talks all about how you've got to take the good and the bad because that's what makes it beautiful. When they're in Europe and they're looking at this architecture and the history of everything that went through it, the good and the bad, that's what gives it its character and its beauty. The beauty is in the good and the bad. So we have to recognize both. We have to be willing to step into both.
A big part of this lens too, because you can feel the energy in the song when Angel's singing about being a loser, schmoozer, dummy. He's kind of owning it in a powerful way. And here's the thing with the things we don't like about ourselves. When we don't like them, we use them in a very destructive way. But when we own them, then we can start to decide what part of this is actually useful, what part of this isn't useful, and I should discard. And you find more of your truth and a power in the thing that's been destroying you. So that's Carl Jung shadow work stuff. So by him just saying, yeah, I'm a schmoozer and a dummy, maybe a schmoozer is, charismatic, and that can be used in a different way instead of for getting drugs.
Yeah. And also too, I want to throw out, I think after this song, we see that Angel is very much not dumb either.
No.
He's social. This is perfect. It goes to the different kinds of intelligence. He might not be the most book smart, but he is very socially savvy, very street smart. And you see that at the end of this song and even into later episodes where he's taking care of everyone, which now that makes sense why people think he's a tubing 3. But back to this.
Yeah. And then the last quote of the song is Husk is talking to Angel again, and he says, it's time to lose your self-loathing. excuse yourself and let hope in.
Yeah.
Play your cards, be who you are. And that's the nut of change, I believe. You got to get rid of the self-loathing. You got to honor who you were and make peace with it. And then you got to let hope in that there's something beyond it. That that wall doesn't have to be the only thing you have.
Well, and two, I never liked that part of the song, excuse yourself, because I feel like that can be misinterpreted as like create excuses. But I think it poetically fits there. But I think that what the intent is forgive yourself, self-forgiveness. And the reason I bring that up is because at the end of this song and how he got to this point was Charlie pissed him off. And he came back after this song and forgave her after he forgave himself. He recognized the value again of that friendship and wanted to honor that relationship, not from a transaction, because it wasn't transactional. He didn't have to forgive her. He could have went back, not said a word to her, and still would have been able to stay at that hotel because that's just who Charlie is.
Oh, and he could have milked it out of her too, because she was so guilty and so bad.
Yeah, I mean, she was crying and like just weeping in front of him. And he's like, hey, it's okay. Not only do I forgive you, but I recognize where you were coming from, what shadow you were casting. And
how you wanted to help. You just want to help. Charlie just wants to help.
Charlie just wants to help everybody. We need to do a podcast on her, I feel.
Yeah, we may have to keep going. If people aren't like, no, please, no more Hazbin, we may keep going with this. So we've done the entire song. Angels come back. He's starting to change. I mean, there's compassion. It's a morph. It's a morph from that transactional to I really care about people. And hey, there are people in this hotel who actually care about me. Yeah. And I have this other quote from Carl Jung. I found it while I was doing research for this podcast. Actually, while I was trying to find the author of the last quote, but I found Carl Jung instead. It says, somewhere right at the bottom of one's own being, one generally does know where one should go and what one should do. But there are times when the clown that we call I behaves in such a distracting fashion that the inner voice cannot make its presence felt. And I think that's where Angel got to. That clown that he was, that shell that he put on to protect himself from his overlord and from life, fell away with Tusk and being losers together. And that inner voice starts to come out as the show goes on.
I love this quote because the distracting part of it just really jumped out at me. It's this idea that it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. When you put so much energy into a persona that's not true to who you are, you get lost along the way too. You kind of lose this sense of where you start and where this persona ends. You know what I mean? Where you end and this persona begins. And so it's this, to me, this idea that that inner voice, I guess, is translated in my head a little bit, the values that I keep hitting on with Angel. They were always there. They were always part of who he was. He just needed friends to believe, accept in him, and kind of pull him out of the distraction and say, no, these are your values. You know, these are the things that you keep pointing towards that you're not willing to let yourself lean into. So we're going to say, lean into these things. And I think that's really powerful for him, to the point that we see him act on these values later on in the show when he goes out with this same friend, Cherry Bomb, and he goes out with the whole basically crew in the hotel besides Alistair and Charlie and Baggy.
Yeah. And Cherry Bomb is like the one who hasn't had any reform, hasn't done any of the work. She just comes in and she's like, hey, Angel. And they're great friends, but they're great friends through their drug habits and their fighting.
Well, and I don't even know that they're necessarily great friends. They're great enablers of each other. They're codependent.
Better, yeah.
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting that they bring her back at this pivotal point, because I think this actually happens in our personal growth journeys. Once we make the change, the universe sometimes tests us. It's like, okay, you made this decision. How serious are you? How much are you willing to step into this new person? And so when she shows up, it challenges every single growth point that Angel had. And they do this in a sort of meta way. And I love how they do it, because while this is simultaneously happening. Charlie is in heaven trying to vouch for the fact that this hotel actually works. And she uses not Penchas, the first attendant, or the first quote unquote guest, but the real first guest. She uses Angel as the example because he's gone through this self-transformation.
And I just want to refer back. She uses him at the very beginning of the show and he blows it for her on TV. So just want to reference that. He's doing everything wrong.
Yes. Oh, in the pilot. Yes.
In the pilot with cherry bombs. So they go to a breaking news as Charlie's trying to say something about the hotel. Oh, look, there's angel dust fighting with cherry bomb. And they're all like, oh, no. So at the very first episode, it doesn't work. And yet Charlie goes back to him. I mean, who is this Charlie?
Right.
Second time.
So Charlie tries again, but that's Charlie's persistence, man, if anything, and her unfettering belief in people. Anyways, Adam, who I would say is the antagonist in this show, one of the antagonists, gives her this very
high level list, blow off list,
superficial, fake. I mean, whatever you want to call it, it's just absurd. I mean,
he's kind of talking from his own perspective because somehow he is in heaven. He's Adam. He's the first man. So it's very religious from that side. So you can get the characters if you know about Adam and Eve and Lucifer and all of the apple and all of that. Yeah, he is just like, whoa, what did I do?
Yeah. And so but here's the fun part for me and why I said this is so meta, is the three things he gives Charlie to show that Angel has changed are kind of the three main challenges, let's say, of Angel's growth. So the first one is he says, be selfless. Angel, as we have talked about, has put on this persona of selfishness. It is all about him. He is the star. But in this part of the song and in the show, we see him take care of his friends. We see him, I forget how he specifically does the selfless one.
He's kind of being selfless because all of a sudden he starts taking care of Nifty, who's kind of this crazy little character who's a little nuts and creepy, but everybody loves her anyway. And he starts following around and protecting her.
That's right. And he turns down opportunities to drink, to get high.
And it's like, where's Nifty? He's really invested in taking care of Nifty.
Right. He really steps into kind of, if it is true, that Enneagram 2 type role. He is the helper, the caretaker, the defender. And so you kind of see that selflessness, I think, actually throughout this entire part of the episode, honestly, which is why I was kind of like, well, there's not really anything specific because it's all him being selfless. Yeah. But then the second one he has to do is not steal, which he doesn't steal. I think it was Nifty was trying to steal stuff and he puts it back and gives Nifty the husk. Here, you want to play with the kitty?
Yeah. No, it's so funny because he's like, no, you can't take that. So he's basically saying stealing is bad. He's like, no, we don't steal from people. Yeah. And then he distracts her. He's like, want to play with the kitty? Your husk, take care of her.
Yeah. And then finally, standing up to the man, which I always laughed that was on Adam's list because to me, that's just ironic because he was not the one that stood up to the man. If you know the story of Adam and Eve is the one that ate the apple and gave it to him. If anything, Adam was like not standing up to the man because he was like, oh, she did it.
Yeah.
So I just laughed at that because I'm like, that is just not even true at all for him. But Angel does. Angel recognizes and steps into that value of protection that we keep talking about. And he stands up to Val, the guy that owns his soul.
Overlord.
Yeah.
And it's to protect Nifty again and his friends.
Yeah. And for those that haven't listened to or haven't watched the show and are listening anyways, there's an element in the show where you can die again. And so there was risk for Angel standing up to Val. Val could have killed him again. And then we assume that you just cease to exist at that point. So there was a risk to Angel's life standing up to Val, and he did it anyways. And I think that that's important because he put somebody else in front of himself. He stepped out of that. And again, it goes back to that selflessness. He was willing to protect and defend these new friendships that he made because he recognized where he was accepted. And if you recognize when he is in his persona in the first half of the show and the first half of the series, he always goes to the bottle because it takes so much energy to put on this persona. When he stands up to Val, he leaves laughing. He's with his friends. He's in a good mood because it wasn't fake. He was coming from a sincerity. He had the energy of, this is who I am. This is who I want to be. These are the people who accept me as that, and that's all I need.
Yeah, it's a really nice story and arc. And that's not even to the end of the season. It's just kind of his arc through the season. And it's really fun to watch. And yeah, that linchpin is, for me, is Loser Baby. And the song's great. Go Google it. It's fun to listen to. Go watch the show.
Yeah.
Dave told me to watch it. I'm like, whatever. Watch the pilot. It's free.
Yes. And in fact, Vizzy now has the pilot up and the first 11 minutes of the other episode up. So you can really get almost like a good hour's worth of the show in to see if it's something that speaks to you. Yeah.
Well, I had a blast doing this. How did you feel about it, Dave?
Oh my gosh, I loved it. And I hope our guests loved it too. You know, we would love to hear any feedback you have about this. If Angel's your favorite character, who your favorite character is, if you'd like us to do more episodes like this, we can even do other characters outside of Hazbin if that gives you guys a archetypical insight into shadow casting. So leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. And if you do want to hear another Hazbin Hotel character, let us know who you want to hear from. You know,
like raise your hand, say more. Like Alistair. like Alistair. Like we really need to do Alistair.
Yeah. And if you're listening, please give us a like, give us a comment. Make sure to share wherever you're listening from.
Until next time.
See ya.